friends, and welcome back to another video. So today I wanted to talk about my top 25 most anticipated reads for 2025. Now, some of these are new releases, but most of these are backlist books that I've either had on my TBR for a while, or they're ones that I'm newly interested in, but a majority of them are backlisted books. So without further ado, since there are 25 books to talk about, let's get into it. So the first book that I want to read in 2025 is The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne. This is the prequel book to the Hunger Games trilogy, which I absolutely love and adore. I've spoken about it in a few of my other videos, but it is focused on President Snow and his first games acting as a mentor in these games. And he's trying to get this very coveted prize in the capital in order to be able to go to this university. But the final thing that these students have to do in order to prove their worth is to mentor children in the games. So he is assigned to this tribute from District 12 named Lucy Gray, and he has to try to help her survive the games. I think the story will be very interesting. I've seen the movie and I am so curious about the backstory of President Snow. I love a villain origin story. I think it's really interesting to see how he becomes the man he is in the Hunger Games trilogy, and I can't wait to dive into this one. I tried to read it once in 2020 or 2021, shortly after it came out, but I was just not in the right headspace to read it then, so I had to DNF it then with the hope of coming back to it. But I think this time I am ready to read it this year, and I'm hoping to read it before the next book on this list comes out, which is Sunrise on the Reaping. The next book that I have is Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne also, and this is another prequel to the Hunger Games trilogy, and it is following Haymitch's Hunger Games, where there were double the number of tributes, and it was the 50th anniversary of the Hunger Games, so it was a special anniversary. And I'm really curious to see how Haymitch's story evolves in this. I'm really curious to see how it all plays out. I know that one of Katniss's mother's friends was also part of these games, and she was the female tribute from District 12. And I know that Haymitch used that force field in order to kill his last opponents in the games, so I'm curious to see how he thwarts the capital in that way. So I can't wait to read this. I can't wait for this to come out. I have already pre-ordered this book and I'm super excited to read this. I can't wait to see what kind of commentary Suzanne has to say in this one. The next book that I can't wait to read in 2025 is also a 2025 release, and this is Calabasas by R.F. Kuang. Now this sounds super interesting. It is a dark academia fantasy story, which is something that I'm intrigued by, and it is following these two graduate students who have to go into hell to try to save their professor's soul, and I think just that whole concept is really interesting, and I was even piqued and intrigued by the idea of this book being described as being a mix of Dante Inferno and Piranesi. So I think that's going to be really interesting to see how it all plays out. And I love that they have these stories of Dante's Inferno, and that's what they're kind of going off to try to navigate hell and to try to find the professor. So I think that will be a really interesting one. I don't know too much more about this book, but I don't want to know too much more, and I can't wait to dive into this. I've heard a lot of people talking about this, and I think it sounds really cool, and it will be a really good read. So the next book that I have is Babel by R.F. Kuang. This is another book by this author, and this is a backlisted book that was released in 2022. So I am super interested in this because it is a historical fantasy, which is my absolute favorite genre, and it is following this young boy who is taken in by these people in London, and he is very well educated. He is taught literature and Greek and all these classics, and he's being prepared for an education at Oxford. And it's all in this hope of basically propagating and expanding on the English Empire and expanding their colonialization of the world. And he kind of has to figure out and come to terms with this as a Chinese boy raised in England, and whether it means betraying his motherland and whether he can be complicit with this or not. And I think it is something that is really interesting. It is a story that is very relevant today, especially for immigrant children. I think this is a book that will really stand out to me and will have a place in my heart for a very long time, so I can't wait to read this. So the next book that I have is Air by Sabaa Tahir, and this follows three main characters, and it is in the same world as An Ember in the Ashes, which I have not read, but I think that I'll still be able to follow along with this. And it is about this prince, this person who has lost some family and is seeking vengeance, and this tracker who is down on their luck. And it is about them kind of teaming up and working together. So I love kind of stories where there is like a heist going on where they're teaming up, working together, and the prince also has to grapple with this idea of trying to be the heir that this kingdom needs, but he doesn't really want the power. And I think that's something that is really interesting to see, especially because often the best leaders for a country are the ones that are the least equipped or least want it, because they end up doing the best for it because they're not interested by their self-motivations. This sounds super interesting. I didn't really know how to describe this because there's so much going on in this book and I don't want to go into too many details, but I can't wait to read this, and this is definitely one that I want to read in 2025. So the next book that I have on my list is Deep End by Ali Hazelwood, and this is following two elite college athletes. One is a swimmer and one is a diver, and they are very competitive with each other, but they find out secrets about each other, and so they decide that they are going to be teammates with benefits. And I think this is going to be a really cute romance book. I have been really meaning to read more Ali Hazelwood books, and I want to dive into some of her backlist as well, but this is a new release that I'm really excited for, and hopefully it is one that I will really like. The next book that I have on my list is My Friends by Fredrik Backman. This is another one of his books, and I'm really excited to dive into this. I really loved A Man Called Ove and Every Morning the Way Home Gets Longer and Longer, as well as The Deal of a Lifetime. So I read those three by him, and I want to read this one really badly because I've liked his writing a lot. And it's basically about four friends who form this very close bond, and they have this relationship that ends up affecting a stranger many years later. And I think that it'll be a very cute discovery of friendship, of love, and kind of what that means. And I just love anything that Fredrik Backman writes. I think his writing style is something that is really something that I resonate with. So I can't wait to dive into this one. The next book that I have is a backlisted book. It is Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson, and it is basically about this criminal mastermind and this urchin who have to work together to try to save their world and defeat this very evil immortal emperor that's called Lord Ruler. And it sounds really interesting. I'm really fascinated by Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere saga and that whole world, so I can't wait to dive into this. I think that this is a series that I will really love, and I've been wanting to get into some more epic fantasies, and I think this would be a good first step into doing so. So I have this book on my list, and then I want to read the next two books, but I didn't count them as part of my 25 books to read because it is part of the same series. The next book that I have on my list is The Women by Kristin Hannah, and this is following a young woman who goes over to Vietnam as a nurse to help the soldiers over there. And so she is seeing all the brutalities of war and kind of in that fight there. And then when she comes home, there's a lot of people that want to forget about the Vietnam War. So it's about her experiences in Vietnam and then coming back and people wanting to forget about the war and that it ever existed, and kind of some of the struggles that happen with trying to erase our history and how this woman is trying to cope and readjust to life after the war, but is struggling to do so. And a lot of people are kind of like negating her experiences or trying to invalidate them and brush them under the rug. So I think this is one that I will really enjoy. I have really loved Kristin Hannah's writing. I read The Four Winds by her and I really enjoyed it, and I really want to get into this one. Alright, so the next book that I have is also by Kristin Hannah, and it is Firefly Lane. So this is following the decades-long friendship between Tully Hart and Cait, and it's the two of them navigating the ups and downs of this relationship through many different decades, and kind of the struggles of their friendship as they deal with love and loss and all of that. And I think it is going to be a beautiful story about female friendship, and it is one that I really want to get into. I have seen the Netflix series of this, and it is a historical fiction that I think will really touch me and is one that will stay with me for a very long time. Alright, so the next book that I have on my list is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, and this follows Dorian Gray, who is a very vain person. He really is enamored by his reflection. He is a person that is very interested in his reflection and what he looks like, and that vanity leads him to some trouble in this book, and he ends up kind of morphing and changing, so he becomes like ugly, and he is no longer this beautiful person, but in this mirror he can see himself as this beautiful person. So it is about vanity, about narcissism, and how we deal with that. So it is one that sounds really interesting. This is a classic book that I have not yet read, but I really want to read, and I think it is one that I will really enjoy and will stick with me for a long time. The next book that I have on my list is Anxious People by Fredrik Backman, and this is about 8 different strangers who end up being at a bank when there is going to be a bank robbery happen. So they have to end up like being together, and they find out all these things about each other as this bank robbery is happening. Or is it happening? That is the question. But it is about them kind of coping with their anxieties and learning things about each other, and I think it is one that I will really like. Like I mentioned before, I really enjoy Fredrik Backman's writing, and I can't wait to dive into this one. The next book that I have on my list is On the Come Up by Angie Thomas. I read The Hate U Give by Angie Thomas, and I really enjoyed that story, so I would love to dive into this one soon. It is about this 16-year-old girl named Bree who wants to be a famous rapper. That has been her lifetime dream career goal. That is what she wants to do. But she faces a lot of challenges. She comes from a very poor background, and her mom has just lost her job. They're facing a possible eviction, and she is getting a lot of attention for this song that goes viral for all the wrong reasons. I think this is one that will be really interesting to read, especially because I think Angie Thomas has really important things to say, and I can't wait to dive into this, and this is one I want to read in 2025. The next book that I have on my list is Go Tell the Bees That I Am Gone by Diana Gabaldon. This is the 9th novel in the Outlander series, and it is the last one that is currently published. I can't wait to dive into this because I've been reading the first 8 books across 2024 and 2025 so far. I recently finished the 8th book, Written in My Own Heart's Blood, so I can't wait to dive into this one. And it is following Claire, who is a World War II nurse in the first book, and Jamie, this 18th century Highlander that she falls in love with. And it is an epic story spanning many decades and their love story throughout all of these different events and things that happen. It is definitely more historical fiction than romance, and in this latest one we are set during the Revolutionary War, and there's a lot of things happening. There was a big cliffhanger that we were left on at the end of Written in My Own Heart's Blood, so I can't wait to dive into this one. My plans currently are to start reading this in March, and hopefully I will be able to say that I have caught up fully with the Outlander series by the end of March. The next book that I have on my list is Scythe by Neal Shusterman. And this is the first book in the Arc of a Scythe trilogy, so if I enjoy this, I will definitely be picking up the next 2. This is one that I've had on my TBR for a really long time. It is a backlisted book that's been there for a while, but it is basically where we've come to this point in humanity where death has been conquered, like nobody dies of natural causes anymore. But in order to keep human population under control, we have what are these things that are known as scythes. So these people are charged with basically ending people's lives, and they have control over who lives and who dies and when they die in order to regulate the population. So I think this is one that will be really interesting, and it is basically questioning what we think is the ideal world and the perfect world, and what would happen in a world where nobody died. I think this has got some moral questions that it kind of discusses, and will be one that I will carry with me for a long time. The next book that I have on my list is One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. I have read and really enjoyed Red, White, and Royal Blue by this author, so I can't wait to read this. But it is a sapphic love story that happens between this 23-year-old that has moved to New York, and she doesn't really believe in love, she doesn't believe in magic or anything supernatural, anything like that. But she ends up meeting this girl from the 1970s who has somehow traveled through time and is like this kind of rocker chick, kind of punk girl. So I think that will be a really fun romance. I haven't read too many sapphic romances, so I'm looking to read some more this year, and I think this is one that I will really love. This is one I definitely want to read in 2025. The next book I have is My Dark Vanessa by Cait Elizabeth Russell, and this book follows a woman in 2 different timelines. One is more of the present day, and one is in the past, and she was 15 years old. When she is a teenager, she ends up having an affair with one of her professors, and she thinks it is love at that time, but now that she's in the present day, kind of coming to terms with what happened to her, she realized that she was being groomed by this teacher, and that the relationship was not romantic, but it was disturbing and should never have happened in the first place. It was an abuse of power on the professor's end, and she suffered for it. So I think it is one that will be really hard to read. It sounds like something that has some really interesting things to say, especially in the light of the Me Too movement that has happened in recent years. It is one that is important to know, especially because there's so many male figures that have these positions of power over women and they abuse them. So I think it is an important story to tell and an important one to read. So the next book that I have on my list is Next Year in Havana by Chanel Clayton. And it's basically about this woman who travels to Havana after the death of her grandmother. She is Cuban American, and she is going there to try to figure out things about her identity and see kind of where her ancestors have come from. And they have not been back since 1958, since the start of the revolution there. And I think this is a story that will really resonate with me, as I am also Cuban American, and it is one that I think will be interesting to read about. I like historical fiction things, and I like that it's her kind of rediscovering her roots. And this is something that I wish I could do. I would like to read more stories about people in similar situations, because I think this is something that isn't really talked about a lot in books. And I've never read a book about a Cuban American person who is rediscovering their roots. So I think this is one that I will really enjoy. And then I want to dive into some of her other books in her backlist as well. The next book I have on my list is Funny Story by Emily Henry. And this one sounds super cute. It's about this woman who has been left by her fiance. She's like jilted at the altar, I think. But basically her fiance leaves her for his friend, who he claimed was nothing more than that. But she ends up having to stay with her ex-fiance's new fiance's ex-boyfriend. That's super complicated, but basically this person that is dating her ex-fiance's new partner. And she has to end up staying with him, and it is about their relationship. She is there until a readathon challenge thing at her library happens. So I think it'll be really cute. I think there is going to be some love of books in this mentioned, and I love books that talk about characters who like to read books as well. I think that's super fun, and I think it will be one that I'll just have a really good time with. So I can't wait to read it and explore some more of Emily Henry's other books as well. So the next book that I want to read in 2025 is actually a classic by Jane Austen, and it is Sense and Sensibility. And this is one that I have not yet read. I've read Mansfield Park and Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, but not Sense and Sensibility. And it basically follows these three young women and their mother who ends up having to leave their home because their father has just died. And his son from his first marriage has ended up inheriting the entire estate and everything in it. So basically they can't live there anymore and they have to leave. And it is about their experiences with love and romance and all of that, and kind of navigating what life is like now that they have lost their father and they're very impoverished. And I think it is a story that I'm really gonna enjoy. I read Mansfield Park after Pride and Prejudice, and I didn't really like that, but I've been saving some of my favorites of hers to read later. So I read Mansfield Park because I didn't think I was gonna love it as much, and I did want to read all of her books. So I think I'm really gonna love Sense and Sensibility, Emma, and Persuasion. I think all of those novels will have a special place for me. And considering how much I love Pride and Prejudice, I can't wait to dive into Sense and Sensibility and see how Marianne's sensibility compares to Eleanor's sense in the book. So the next book I have on my list is Legendborn by Tracey Deonn. And this book follows this girl, Bree, who is 16, and I believe she's lost her mother. So she ends up moving to this boarding school. When she goes there, she finds out about all these magical things, and she finds out that she has these magical powers that she never knew about, and joins this secret society called Legendborn. But these very mysterious things have been happening on the campus, and she wants to figure out what is happening and save her school. It sounds like a really cool and fun fantasy that will be really exciting to dive into. I know that there are other books in this series, that this is the first book in the series, but this is the only one that I currently have on this list of 25 books. And if I enjoy it, I'll definitely continue on with the series. But I think her writing is going to be very good, and I've heard a lot of great things about this. I know so many people have absolutely loved this book, so I can't wait to dive into this world and see what it's all about. The next book I have on my list is The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett, and this basically follows two sisters who are identical, except they don't really look exactly alike. So one of them lives as a Black woman, and they're actually both born Black, but one of them lives identifying as a Black woman in a Black neighborhood, and she kind of lives that kind of life. And the other one passes as white, and she lives a very different kind of affluent lifestyle. And it's kind of about their interweaving stories and how they cope with these identities over a span of several decades. This is one that has been on my TBR for quite a while, and I do want to read this in 2025. I think it'll be a really interesting read, and it'll be interesting to see how the two characters' lives diverge after they move on with their lives, and one of them is living as a Black woman and one is identifying as a white woman and passing. So I think this will be one that will stick with me for a while and will be a great book to read in 2025. And finally, the last book that I have to mention is These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. And it's basically set in 1920s Shanghai, and it is about this woman and this man who are basically in a Romeo and Juliet type of situation. It is a retelling of that, and they come from rival gangs, rival families, but they have to end up working together to deal with this greater issue in their world. I think this is going to be a fantasy that I really love, and I can't wait to explore some more of Chloe Gong's works. This is the first book in this duology. I think this is Chloe Gong's debut novel, so I can't wait to read these two and then to read Foul Lady Fortune, which I also have, if I really enjoy this. But I'm excited to dive into this. So many people have really loved this, and I really love the idea of this 1920s vibes and the Shanghai aesthetic. I think it will be a really fun novel to get into, and it's one that I'm hoping to read by the end of February. So those are 25 books that I want to read in 2025. What are some books you want to read in 2025? I'd love to know, and please leave your thoughts down below. If you plan on reading any of these books, or if you've read any of them and have thoughts to share, I'd love to hear it. And if you like this video, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you for the next one. I hope that wherever you are in the world, you are doing well, and whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening, I hope you're having a great day, and I will see you for the next one.